Stay tuned after this episode for a sneak peek at Patreon exclusive material. Ben Riggs presents Reading D&D Aloud. Episode 47, Monsters, Aliens, and Holes in the Ground with Stu Horvath.
Greetings, Internet. It's me, apparently controversial historian Ben Riggs, um, here after a absolutely amazing Gary Con, and with me is a man who you might not know his name now, but I think that you will come to be very familiar with it in coming years. Is Stu Horvath.
Hi.
Did I say your name right?
You did, yeah.
Author of this book, Monsters, Aliens, and Holes in the Ground. And Stu, what is Monsters and Aliens and Holes in the Ground?
It is a guide to tabletop role-playing games from Dungeons and Dragons to Mothership. Basically using my own personal collection as the examples that we chart the course with.
And it is a remarkable book.
Oh, get out of town.
I picked it up just because it was on sale at Barnes and Noble, and I was like, well, it's a D&D history book. I have to pick it up because this is the field. And then I will further confess, I didn't pick it up again until we had scheduled an interview.
Oh, there you go.
And in my mind, I was expecting to find a rather cursory survey of just like, the biggest names in the business. And then I start flipping through it and I see Harn. And I start flipping through it and I think Borderlands for RuneQuest. Um, I see Metamorphosis Alpha, and then I actually and those names catch my attention, readers, because they are not the like main stops that you would see on a whistle stop tour of role playing game history in terms of products. Uh, and then I actually start reading some of your entries, and I am like, holy crap. You have attempted something that really only Shannon Appelcline and somewhat I hope I'm not minimizing Kevin Culp here, but also Kevin Culp attempted in a lot of their product histories on Drive Through RPG,
Yep.
which is it's like you do both business history and a history and like a bit of a summary of the product, and you place it in the overall scope of the role-playing game industry, and you do it thoughtfully and engagingly and passionately. And
Oh.
I mean, do you think you're the one of the best read people in the tabletop role-playing game industry at this point? I mean, this
I
book is like an inch and a half thick.
well, I mean, Shannon's books are, that's I don't know, that they're 5 inches when you put them all next to each other. That's I don't know. I mean, I've certainly read probably more role-playing games than the folks in my Discord. Uh, I don't know. I don't think I'm the I come from a place of sort of, I do things for my own enjoyment, which is sort of the whole book kind of comes out of the Vintage RPG Instagram, which is just sort of me like posting about the stuff because I have it all and it's interesting and I wanted to share it.
So
And
tell us about your Instagram if that's where this started.
yeah, I mean, I had started collecting sort of somewhat more seriously, and I suddenly had like a shelves and shelves of this stuff, and it's all cool, and I was really into it, and folks, my friends were just like, why don't you just post it on the internet? And I was like, well, I guess that's what the internet's for. Uh, and I started an Instagram account that became relatively popular, and daily posts and just sharing stuff and my impressions of stuff. As I was interested in it, literally as I was interested in it, I would read stuff and I'd post about it. Uh, and then, it got bigger and bigger. And so now I write, a year's worth of posts ahead of time, just so that I don't have to deal with it week to week, but it's still just like the pile of stuff that is the most recent stuff that I've looked through and engaged with, and all this art, and so much of it is comes from a place of like D&D is the main event. Everybody likes D&D, and that's fine. But there's so much cool stuff out there that isn't D&D, and so much awesome art. Like there's just like a huge world of stuff that I will never get tired of showing people cool, fantasy art from the 70s and 80s that they've never seen before.
So I'm going to ask you another really ticky-tacky question. So how'd you get all the rights to the art? I mean, this must have been a nightmare. Or were you just like, well, I'm pleading fair use
It's
because I'm
fair
writing
use.
about the products? Okay.
That'll, well, I mean, I took the photos of objects that are in my own collection. So, mainstream publishers thought that that was like, oh my God, we're going to have to try and get all the rights to this. But MIT Press was just like, no, that's fair use. It's fine. So we just, like, that was it, And like,
Yeah,
who's really going to complain? Like, most of the stuff is like out of print or, just doesn't really exist in the marketplace anymore. And the stuff that does, it's not like it's free advertising.
yeah, and I mean, I will tell you, um, rights and art were of an issue of vast concern when we were putting together my book. And again, I heard very different answers from very different people. And you're right that the answer I did hear from the academic press was often, it's fair use. Again, you're taking a picture of something you own, like, that seems like uh, it should be a legally fine act.
Yeah.
But
I mean, we didn't do any. I didn't do any interiors because that was dodgier. We decided that as much as I wanted to have a picture of the empty map of Isle of Dread and stuff like that, um, I think the only time we broke that rule was we did the back cover of one of the MERP books so that I could get that MERP, the Middle Earth, the ridiculous MERP Middle Earth map because it's just so important to see that. Um, but even still, that's the back cover. We didn't do any interiors, and we tried to make sure that everything was, not, game related, so that no one could argue that we were diminishing the potential for sale or whatever.
all right, so let's give people who are again unaware of your work a peek inside the covers. And you suggested that we read Thieves World from page 89, right?
Mm-hmm.
Good, because again, this is a product I know very little about.
Oh, nice.
Uh, so and I'll admit I took a peek before this, but I'm super jazzed to read it. And feel free to interrupt me at any time with commentary.
Okay.
All right.
I've not read it since I wrote it, basically. So this is sort of new to me too.
That's got to be a lie. I mean, just that it's new to you. I mean, you wrote it. It can't be new per
Well,
se.
it's like it's new in that way that like I've very much forgotten what I was thinking about. Like I wrote that's 5 years ago now, almost.
That okay. That now I
Yeah.
see where you're going. So that's a lie. I suppose it's coming out kind of strong, but so page 89, Thieves World, 1981. The history of pop music is littered with supergroups, collaborations that draw together already famous musicians to cut an album. Think The Highwaymen, which consisted of Johnny Cash, Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings, and Chris Christopherson. Or The Traveling Wilburys, which gathered together George Harrison, Tom Petty, Bob Dylan, Jeff Lynne, and Roy Orbison. These sorts of groups tend to represent a specific moment in time, an intersection of careers that produces one or two albums, then dissolves as the artists move on to other projects. Thieves World is the role playing game equivalent of a supergroup, a moment of amazing promise that attracted a huge nexus of talent, delivered an amazing product, then disappeared as if it never happened at all. And I just need to point out what a great introduction to this entry already. Um,
Thank you.
Thieves World 1979 was the first fantasy anthology to embrace the notion of a shared world. It was conceived by Robert Lynn Asprin? Really? His name's
Yeah.
Asprin? That's goofy. Um, it was conceived by Robert Lynn Asprin, Lynn Abbey, and Gordon R. Dickinson in 1978. Since world building acted as the most significant hurdle to writing fantasy fiction, why not provide authors with a ready made world in which to tell their stories? Those stories would, in turn, fill the details of that world. They came up with Sanctuary, a recently conquered city primarily characterized by its thriving criminal underworld. Out of the invasion unfolds a larger drama. The gods of the new empire struggle against the original gods for control, and mortals are regularly swept up in their rivalries. The concept attracted an all-star roster of writers, including Poul Anderson, C.J. Chira. Do you think I said that right?
I don't know. I've
I'm going to go
often
with it.
wondered that.
C.J. Chira is what I'm going to go with. Philip Jose Farmer and more, who contributed to a dozen anthologies between 1979 and 1989. Several authors spun their own novels out of their Thieves World work, and there was even a series of graphic novel adaptations in the mid 80s, which was now iconic comic artist Tim Sale's first big break. The series was successful enough that similar shared world series appeared in its wake, like C.J. Chira's
Hmm.
Merovingian Knights, George R.R. Martin's Wild Cards, and Janet Morris's Heroes in Hell. The anthologies were a massive success among RPG players. With their ensemble cast of characters and interwoven narratives, they feel like RPGs, a feeling that would grow as the editors overturned the status quo with setting-wide events like the collapse of the Rankin Empire, which with which both characters and authors would have to reckon. Chaosium snagging the Thieves World license was a coup. Almost everybody wanted to play in Sanctuary. Smartly, that's exactly what Chaosium delivered. The ability for anyone to visit the city, no matter their preferred game system. Abilities and guidance for all the major inhabitants of Sanctuary were provided for in Adventures in Fantasy, Chivalry and Sorcery, Dragon Quest, The Fantasy Trip, Rune Quest, Tunnels and Trolls, and even the science fiction RPG Traveler. Thanks to, and I have to turn the page, the Deity and Demigods kerfuffle, Chaosium got both versions, advanced and basic, of Dungeons and Dragons in the mix. Could you briefly refresh my audience's memory on the deities and demigods kerfuffle, or is that too far away for you even?
Oh no, I remember that one. So yeah, D&D's Deities and Demigods came out at 80 or 81, and it was a supplement for Dungeons and Dragons, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and it included the Cthulhu mythos, pantheon, and characters from Michael Moorcock's Elric stories. A lot of people say that like they stole it, or like there was copyright infringement. It turns out that Moorcock and Call of Cthulhu was sort of up for grabs because of the copyright there is unknown, and Michael Moorcock gave permission for both to both people. So Chaosium was just like, hey, just give us a thank you, and maybe like collaborate with Thieves World, and that flew for a little while. And then somebody decided, no, we're just going to pull that stuff. And then Alleged was born because it was never really explained publicly why those two chapters were disappeared. And it has become probably one of the most collectible Dungeons and Dragons books in the wake of that.
Yeah, and I've heard Jim Lauder talk about that. I've heard Jim Ward talk about that. They tell remarkably different stories. Um,
I've heard a lot of different versions. Uh, yeah.
all right. So, but the short version is that's how they were able to print AD&D and D&D stats in the book was because of that, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay, great. What's more, the conversions were written in most cases by the designers of those games. Dave Arneson, Lawrence Schick, Mark Miller, and Ken St. Andre all have credits on the front of the box. Chaosium even brought in pinch hitters for what is arguably the core of the box, the city itself, tapping Midkemia Press to develop the streets and alleys of Sanctuary. Taken all together, Taken all together, for the world of role-playing games, the Thieves World box set represents unprecedented star wattage, a once-in-a-lifetime, never-to-be-repeated collaboration, and Chaosium's best-selling box set up to that point. It's the We Are the World of role-playing games, if, We Are the World was actually a good song.
I mean, it's true. That's a terrible song.
And then you go on to talk about Midkemia Press, which I will. I don't think it comes back to Thieves World though, does it?
I might at the very, very
Let's
end.
see. Labyrinth Lord. A few more products before closing down. Let's see. Midkemia joined these two tools, random tables for street encounters and city building, to capture the gritty urban feel of Sanctuary, as established in the anthologies. There are 15 pages of tables that account for everything, from time of day to street size to neighborhood. They make Thieves World feel alive, on the fly, and guarantee that no two trips through Sanctuary streets ever feel the same, just like a real city. So, thump. Uh, I love the brevity of it. I love that you're able to explain why it's cool, why you'd want to check it out. You give us both a peek inside the cover and a peek into the creation of the product and a picture of where that product stands in the history of role-playing games themselves. And geez, what do you think that was? 500 words?
Yeah, probably. I don't think a single chapter was more than 1,000, 1,500. So yeah.
I mean, you do it a lot with a little. It's engaging, it's light, it's fun, um, and like again, I'll be honest. Again, when I saw what the product was supposed to be, I was kind of like, it seems an awful lot like what Shannon has already done. Why do we need this? And then I picked it up, read a few, and I'm like, oh, I understand exactly why we need this now and why it's excellent. Um, it has become a delightful piece of bathroom reading, which is way better than doom scrolling. Let me tell you, you know, I'd much rather sit down and read about one TTRPG entry than anything else. So this started as you said it was an Instagram,
Yep, or into my Instagram.
and how did it evolve into a book?
So I was just I've always sort of I always it always felt the Instagram feed always felt like notes for something. I didn't know what, and I didn't have any idea about how to get into publishing. But then Ed Park followed me, and Ed Park is formerly of the Village Voice, a bunch of other stuff. He's at the Believer, and his novel, which came out the same year as my book, Same Bed, Different Dreams, was a Pulitzer Prize shortlist for fiction. So real heavy hitter with the words. Really believed in what I was doing, and like was just like, dude, make a book out of this, and kind of dragged me into like put me with uh an agent that the as I said, I mean we wound up going with MIT Press, which was something that the agency stuff with the mainstream publishers didn't really work out, but I learned a lot, and then took it to MIT Press. My editor there is in my Call of Cthulhu game, so he had to do exactly what I wanted, or else. And a kind of cool book came out of it.
Wow. Let me just write down to ask about Call of Cthulhu game. Um, so no agency.
No, I mean there just wasn't there. Everybody got kind of hung up on the idea of the pictures. They felt that it needed lots and lots of art, and they didn't want to figure out how to get lots and lots of art. Even though if I had to, I'm pretty sure it wouldn't have been all that difficult. Even when I finally was just like asked D&D Wizards like for permission, they were just like, yeah, it's all fair use. Just whatever, don't worry about it. It's like, all right, you said that in an email. I'm holding you to that.
Wow. Um, and again, it doesn't surprise me, uh, based on when you were selling this, that there would be skepticism. So for listeners who don't know, um, there is an emerging kind of meta literature about D&D and D and role-playing games, but it's fairly new. But everything from, lit RPG and Dungeon Crawl Carl to my book to the monsters know what they're doing to the flippin' D&D cookbook. Have, have you seen what the D&D cookbook sold?
I don't have any idea what it sold, but I
200,000 copies the last time I checked.
that's insane.
I know. I know. And uh, it is a thing that uh, my experience with publishing is it's very white and very old.
Hmm.
Um, And if you're north of 50-55 and in New England, New York, New Jersey, you have a very particular conception of what D&D is, and it is a stretch to imagine what it is today. And
Hmm.
again, the way I keep explaining it to people of that generation is you need to imagine that D&D to the coming generation is what rock and roll was to your generation. It is a thing that is pervasive everywhere, and if you're not doing it, you're interested in doing it. Um, so I can understand how, how many pages is your book? 350?
No, it's more than 400.
Or
Uh,
I can
we
understand how a 400 page book that's going to be hardcover and full color with and I'm assuming there's a fair amount of original art in there.
just so Kyle Patterson, who did the section breaks, the decade breaks, and then some spot illustrations here and there. Some and all of it fantastic, but not a whole lot.
But I mean, again, those section like my 4-year-old saw the section break and he wanted to climb off the toilet and take the book from me.
Oh
You
my
know,
God, Kyle, it just absolutely was amazing. He just manages to distill everything about a whole decade into one 2-page spread, and it was just every time he filed one of those with us, like a sketch, it was just like my eyes fell out of my head. It was crazy.
yeah, I mean, it must have been absolutely delightful as the writer to see that.
Yeah.
Um, but again, I can see how a publisher would be like, you don't believe in the market, you don't understand the population it's going for, and it's going to be an expensive book. Like what's the cover price? Let's see.
50.
Yeah. And I think I got it for like 33 or something like that. I think it was
Yeah.
like it was a third off sale. Um, but at the same time, the D&D audience has proven they will pay $50 for a big hardcover book that has tons of beautiful pictures in it. And a thing I keep coming back to on this podcast that my audience is like, every time I say it, they should take a shot is uh, after the pandemic, when my school went back to being in person, um, I walked into the faculty lounge and every woman under 30 is talking about their D&D game. That audience would see this book and be like, "Oh, this is incredible." It gives me a history of all these products I don't know about. It's all in one place and it's beautiful. Um, again, I can just see the market there. So I hope MIT Press has a hit on its hand with this. Um, but because yeah, it's absolutely stupendous.
Well, thank you.
And now I'm rambling off into almost something like hagiography.
Well, I
Um,
think I think I do want to say I think that it's a 1-2 punch. I think that you're right about underestimating the audience, because I saw that firsthand. But I also think that um, I feel like a lot of publishers underestimate publishing. I've recently, so when I was a kid, I loved these Daniel Cohen books, monster encyclopedias. There were tons of them in different varieties, like the fairy books, Alan Lee and Brian Froud. You have like monster encyclopedias, Daniel Cohen, all of this stuff. 70s, 80s, tons of them. They all disappear for the most part once the internet really takes off in the 2000s. But I don't think that the market for that has completely dried up, but there's just nothing like it on the market anymore. A few things here and there. The Vason art book is a good example. DK just did a supernatural creatures book, which sort of really scratches the same itch. But I think that there's just like these books. I literally have started in the last month to buy up all of these like cheap paperbacks and stuff that I used to get at a library. I've got like 100 of them over there, and they're they're just they were being printed in such huge numbers, and they were selling fine. But like there's just this belief, I think, in I think that publishers believe that they could sell like, you know, superstar YA books and, you know, cookbooks and like these specific things that they've invested infrastructure in developing a pipeline for. And then they kind of have forgotten that there's all sorts of different books that you could make that are fun and exciting that people will read.
Like I love a good uh National Geographic coffee table book.
Right.
Um because again, there's nothing quite like them anymore. Or if you get your hands on like a 1981 printing of Carl Sagan's Cosmos,
Hmm.
where again it's full color throughout, amazing photographs, amazing art, but it certainly seems to be that the publishers believe that the internet has made those books obsolete.
Right.
And I just don't know that it's true because I think it's worth paying for the curation. Um, and even though you can get amazing pictures on your phone, uh, who's picking them? Like even
Eh,
if you go to NASA's website, like it can be. It's not like they're like I shouldn't. I'm talking out of my butt now. When was the last time I went to NASA's website?
Yeah.
Um,
But it and having it in your hands in print is different. And like there is I just heard somebody talking about how the big publishers believe that there's no such thing as a best-selling coffee table art book. And it's nonsense because the Gnomes book sold millions of copies in the 70s and it's about gnomes. You know, like you could there's definitely a market there. We could do it again with dragons and have a really cool multi-artist dragon book and you'd sell gangbusters. I know it, but once you there's like this doom thing that is I think self-reinforcing in the publishing industry where they believe that it's not going to sell, so they don't bother to market it, and then it doesn't sell. Gosh, who'd have thunk that would happen?
um, so it was you said the writer's name was Ed Park.
Yes.
Okay, and who's your editor at MIT Press, if I may ask?
Noah Springer.
Noah Springer. What was it like working with him? What was the process like?
So I think I'm allowed to talk about this publicly. Uh
I mean, just don't say anything bad about him.
No, 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 no. I no. It was great. It was fantastic working with them. Because of I did not want the book to come out in the 50th anniversary of D&D year last year. I wanted it out in 2023 ahead of that. Because I just thought it was going to get buried. If and that's where it naturally would have come out if we followed, you know, sort of traditional publishing timelines. The world of publishing, I came up, I used to work at the New York Daily News. I'm a daily guy. Like I work fast and like this whole the pace of traditional book publishing is so slow. It just I can't. I have trouble. But Noah was really believed in the book. MIT really believed in the book and they were willing to let me run the production on the book, which we completed in 3 months, editing, layout, art, covers, delivered it by the end of 2022, and it was off the boat um, in the beginning of 2023. And so, yeah, the process was very fast and uh, rigorous, but it was all sort of run by a team of freelancers that I put together, like my A team.
You're 18. Wow. Do you have a favorite product in the book, or was it Thieves World?
Um, oh, favorites. I mean, there's so many is the thing. You know what? I think maybe it changes. My opinion, one of the things that I feel like makes me me in terms of being some like a public commentator on this stuff is the fact that I'm really open about the fact that my opinion changes depending on, you know, where I'm at. You know, stuff happens. Like life goes on. You know, I read different things, and the last thing I wrote for the book um was I discovered the Rocky and Bullwinkle RPG from TSR. And like I found that and I was just like, holy crap. Are you kidding me? And then I got it and it's just like, oh my God, this is like it's like it anticipates so many non-traditional role-playing game designs that come 20 years later. And it's just so I was just like, this is ridiculous. Who is this product made for? But also, it predicted the future. I
And
just like I love this business. It was
and
just
that was Zeb Cook, and do you recall who else?
Warren Spector.
Warren Spector.
I
So
yeah, definitely Warren Spector.
when they got the rights to that, uh, Rocky and Bullwinkle had largely left the airwaves, and it was before the advent of VHS.
Oh,
So, in order to prep Warren and Zeb to make the role-playing game, they flew them to New York, and they went to, I forget what museum. It might have been the Museum of Modern Art, but I don't think so. But there was some museum in New York that had a complete Rocky and Bullwinkle library. And over the course of about 48 hours, they sat down and they mainlined the entire show,
that's amazing.
just taking notes.
And
And
that's such a TSR move, right? Like,
yeah,
it's just like this thing is gone. We fondly remember it, but there's nowhere like for anybody to actually engage with it now. And we're gonna make a game out of it.
they said, I want to say there's masks in the game. Is that right? Or
There's there's like hand puppets, like that are plastic gloves, and there's so much stuff in there, man.
they said they were inspired by some of the toys Burger King was giving away
It feels like
to make
that,
some of
yeah.
that stuff.
Yeah.
And it's weird because last night at GaryCon, as the sun was setting, I was sitting in what was once Hugh Hefner's suite with my podcast partner Scott Bruner, and we were sitting in front of the fire in these large plush chairs. And what are we doing? Interviewing Zeb Cook in
Hey.
what is formerly Hugh Hefner's suite. And right before we start, Scott says to me, "Why didn't I bring my copy of the Rocky and Bullwinkle game?" Like, I don't know, man. Like, fair point, but we're mostly going to talk about second edition.
Yeah, I mean
Um,
Planescape, man.
yeah, yeah. I mean, so let me segue into that. Um, I asked Zeb in that conversation because, like, the Museum of Modern Art has started taking tabletop role-playing games into their collection as pieces.
Oh, that's
Uh,
interesting.
do you think tabletop role-playing game products are art?
Oh, that is yeah, why not? I have a broad view of what art is, just like I have a broad view of what horror is and what role-playing games are. So, yeah, sure, it's art. I think that there's better expressions of the art of tabletop uh than the actual products, but the products is a good place to start, sure.
Yeah, because again, you always have to distinguish between the products and the practice, right?
Right.
Um,
And there's no formal control over the practice. That's the beauty of it, right? Is that
yeah,
that there's nothing governing table to table what that practice is like.
yeah, and maybe not every like I played in a Cyberpunk Red game the other day that was, and again I knew this going in, but it was okay. You all appear on a football field with machine guns, kill each other, and off we went.
Yeah.
And while that particular game, which I was playing to because I just wanted to see the system, um, was not necessarily art. And I hope I'm not got it. I'm not running down the DM. I'm not running down anybody because we knew what we were going into. Um, but I certainly feel like it's much easier to make a claim for the uh, practice of role-playing games being an art, but the publication and the products oftentimes are essentially technical manuals, right? It's like technical writing,
Totally.
uh,
Yeah.
um, and it needs to explain what you're supposed to do in the practice, but also hopefully inspire you. And there certainly are products that reading them is an aesthetic experience, right?
Yeah.
Um, and that is why I would argue that at least some tabletop role-playing game products are art because you do have an aesthetic experience when you read them. Is that what you would say they are too?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's probably lines to be drawn. Like I think that you could I would argue that every single Delta Green product is art or literature at the very least, because I read them like I read horror novels, and I enjoy them in very similar ways. And yeah, sure, there's mechanics in there, but that actually contributes to the experience in a way. Um, whereas like I don't know, what Phoenix what is that? Phoenix Control, Phoenix Command.
Phoenix
The
Command.
like is that art? That's a lot of tables, man. I don't know.
Could you tell the audience what Phoenix Command is?
Phoenix Command is a small arms system that was intended as a bolt-on for like a combat replacement for your favorite modern role-playing games, and it's just chart after chart, painstakingly accurately simulating bullets and guns. Like, and it's beautiful in its way. Maybe it is art because it is beautiful in its way. It's horrible to imagine kind of bringing it to the table and like being able to play with it expediently. But it is what it is, and for I kind of love it. But is it art? I don't know. Maybe.
So tell me about your Call of Cthulhu game.
It was it was in the wake of the pandemic. Folks, my crew at Unwinnable, my main gig for a long time was unwinnable.com, which is a sort of video game criticism site, pop culture crit. And the editorial staff, basically during the pandemic, we were all locked down, and I started running Call of Cthulhu, and we did a whole bunch of single session like one shots, and then we that segued into Horror on the Orient Express, which was so much fun. And then we recently just finished up Masks of Nyarlathotep, and now I'm taking a long break for running. That's the second time in this decade that I've run Masks of Nyarlathotep, and I need to not do that for a while. But yeah, and my editor at MIT is part of that, so he had to. I killed his character so many times.
Tell me about Horror on the Orient Express because I have the box set sitting behind me. I haven't actually read it, and I've always been kind of like it's on the train. Like I don't know, man. Like it just seems like, but I've never. I literally cracked it open. I saw a really weird icon. Closed it again, and that was probably 8 years ago.
So
Um,
I think I think too much is made of the idea of role playing games being on rails as a bad thing. Uh, Sometimes it's a good thing. And I think Horror on the Orient Express is a really good object lesson in that. Um, you are putting your players through a thing. They're basically set up looking for pieces of this icon, the Sedefkar simulacrum, and they go on the Orient Express, which happens to have stops at the places where the pieces are located. It's very convenient. Um, and then the second edition has all of these historical vignettes that you flash back to with pre-generated characters. Um, so yeah, it's literally on rails and it feels on rails. But there's something that happens. The trade-off is that you get these really fantastic dramatic moments, and there's character beats that really work in a way that, you know, don't it does it just that kind of thing doesn't manifest when you're doing like a West Marches style hex scroll. It's a different kind of experience, and for playing online with a bunch of people who don't really role play uh during a pandemic. Like the constraints of being on rails really kept the game focused. They actually struggled a bit with Masks of Nyarlathotep and the sandbox nature of it, because they were just looking for a little bit more narrative guidance.
hmm.
uh
How'd you get into role-playing games?
uh so um Pregnant pause. I really wanted to be into Dungeons and Dragons, and I wasn't allowed to initially, because of the climate of the thing in the 80s. Not that my parents were particularly susceptible to things like the Satanic Panic, but they were a little not understanding what I wanted to get into. And they were hesitant. I did eventually convince a grandparent to get me some stuff. My parents were a little annoyed about that. going around them. But then I got this whole bunch of D&D stuff. I had no idea what I was buying. None of it made any sense, and I didn't have any idea how to play for a couple years until I got the Marvel superheroes character encyclopedias, and through that and interest my growing interest in Marvel Comics at the time, and along with my friends who were constantly wondering who could beat who in a fight, that kind of created a model for how to play the role playing game, and that's sort of how we got started. And then I kind of backfilled with D&D, and soon after that, I was playing Cthulhu, and yeah.
That's interesting. Because so my first game, like I played a couple sessions of D&D, and then maybe I bought the player's handbook, but the first game that I tried to run was also Marvel superheroes for similar reasons.
Hmm.
Because I was just more into Marvel superheroes than fantasy at the time. So I think you're the only other person I've ran into where Marvel superheroes was kind of that first experience.
Those
Um,
box sets are super welcoming. I feel like they're really like I think that they get overlooked a lot when we talk about early introductory games.
yeah, it was I want to say Jeff Grubb did most of the work,
Yeah.
but Steve Winter came in and did a pass with the voice of Doctor Doom. Um, and it was Steve Winter's Doctor Doom voice that Jeff Grubb pointed to as a remarkable feature of those box sets. What Marvel comics are you into?
Back then I was a Wolverine guy, Doctor Strange guy, Moon Knight. Um, Now I don't really read comics anymore, which is weird.
Like, I definitely had a comics phase, and I would say comics are like my no, secondary probably. Comics are probably my secondary nerddom. Um, Video games are third for me.
Mm.
Uh, so like Sandman used to be one of my favorite things.
Oh
Now less
man.
so. Um, and God.
I was more of a Hellblazer guy back in the 90s, so like I kind of dodged that bullet a little bit, but man, I feel everybody's pain on that one.
Oh, oh God. Like even when before it got really bad and really graphic, and again, they're all allegations. But like even if you take some of this stuff as consensual, you're hassling the nanny the first day she's at your house.
Yeah, it's
Like,
all
dude, come on.
it's like
Um,
horror movie stuff, man. Like
uh,
it's bad.
yeah, yeah. Even very generous interpretations are still kind of and again, I do believe that you can separate the art from the artist, but the Sandman is a very personal work.
Yeah.
Sandman kind of looks like him sometimes.
Sandman seems to be a tool that was used in in the process. Yeah, the whole thing is very very difficult. Like I'm a Lovecraft fan, and like for better and worse, but at least he's dead, and like I'm not funding him.
Yeah, and
Like
I want to say it was Victor Laval who pointed out, if I'm saying his name right, um, that Lovecraft's best work is also his least racist. And you're like, oh yeah, it's a very valid point. So, like to enjoy most of his good best work, you're not confronted by like really badly named cats.
yeah.
Um,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's the bad work that's the racist stuff. So that which is also helpful. But in the past 6 months or so, I've really, again, to avoid to avoid doom scrolling, it's like, okay, I'm reading Comixology on my phone, not looking at Reddit or Facebook or something, and in anticipate, I read that I forget who it was that was like, I read all the Marvel comics and wrote a book about it, but that book was really enjoyable to me. So with Fantastic Four coming out, I've started reading the whole run of Fantastic Four. And again, I'm only at issue 14. I'll probably get through like the Kirby Lee run and then jump to something else.
Mm.
Uh but the Kirby Lee run again, it's pretty fun.
Yeah.
Like it's I always thought the Fantastic Four was more about family, but now, at least in the early years, it is clearly a sci-fi comic.
Yeah.
Um, and you can tell that people were like really jazzed and interested about sci-fi back in the early 60s. I just read an issue where Mr. the Fantastic Four are the first people on the moon. They get there and they're like, "Oh, look, a ruined civilization and communists and mutant apes." Um,
Of
so
course
it,
there's apes. There
yeah,
has to
yeah.
be.
And the Watcher shows up and he's like, "Hey, everybody, I'm the Watcher, and we're really not supposed to mess with you guys, but I'm going to make an exception. This is a commie versus capitalist death match on the moon."
The first of many Watcher exceptions.
Yeah.
This guy's one
So
big exception.
yeah, yeah. So there certainly is a lot of energy and enthusiasm in those comics. And again, compared to today, um, when you're like, oh, I see so many different dooms just over the horizon,
Yeah.
to look at the future and see endless possibilities, humans twisting things, turning knobs, adjusting them. Everything's gonna be better. You're gonna live longer in space with cooler stuff, and I don't know if anybody thinks that anymore. Um,
No. I want to blast people off into space to get rid of them, you know?
that's grim. It's yeah, that's dark. Stu,
Yeah, you know.
is Stu short for anything?
Stuart.
Stuart.
Yeah.
It's a good first name.
Yeah.
You can do a lot with it with Stuart.
Yeah.
Um, all right. What creator of role-playing games would you most want to talk to?
Oh man. Greg Stafford easily. Like I met him once at the second Necronomicon, which was like 93, and I was like a dingus, and he was so kind and like giving of his time when like there were a million Chaosium people around, like, and they were doing business, and but like I had like so many stupid questions and he took the time to answer all of them, and it was great. And uh I he his call it, Chaosium in general has always been very much on my wavelength. Like I've just been able to read Chaosium products in a way that uh I've not been able, they're just really easy and engaging for me. And Greg's stuff in particular, I think that Pendragon is probably my favorite role playing game.
Oh wow.
Um, I think if you want to talk about art, like that's just a beautifully executed theme matching, system matching, practice. Like all of it is just interconnected in such an elegant way. Um, yeah, I really wish I had the ability to chat with Greg.
I will briefly shout out that yesterday at GaryCon, Greg Stafford was named the 2025 recipient of the Gary Gygax Lifetime Achievement Award.
Nice.
So pretty cool. Chaosium's Jeff Richards said, quote, "Short of Gary Gygax himself, no one else is so worthy of that recognition. Thank you, Luke Gygax and GaryCon." Um, although I would shout out maybe Dave Wesley should get a little bit more credit in there. But hey, that's we those are the arguments that we nerds can have forever, right? Dave Wesley versus Dave Arneson versus Gary Gygax, and
Yeah.
right on down the line.
I'm
Um,
always I don't really know very firmly what the division is between like what Gary wrote and what the Daves contributed. And
oh, let me briefly tell you because I think I can do it briefly.
all right.
So, Dave Wesley up in the Twin Cities decided to run a Napoleonic simulation where called Brownstein,
Hmm.
where players were going to control one character in this town called Brownstein, preparing for a Napoleonic invasion, and they could do anything that they wanted to, and that was the game. And they did it once, and they were like, "This is so incredible! Let's do it again! Let's do it again! Let's do it again!" And they were constantly like demanding that Dave Wesley run Brownsteins. Dave Arneson then advertised in a local zine saying, "Hey guys, I'm going to do a medieval Brownstein," is the way
Mm.
he described it. Um, and this became Blackmore, wherein the characters instead of preparing for a Napoleonic invasion, we're exploring dungeons beneath Castle Blackmore. The characters persisted from week to week, and grew in power. He used Gary Gygax's chainmail rules with the
Mhm.
fantasy supplement to do this, and then I want to say it was November of 1970. No,
It's earlier than that.
yeah, it has to be earlier than that. I'm going to say November of 1972. I literally saw a placard describing this yesterday. So anyway, at some point he goes down to Lake Geneva, runs it for Gary Gygax. Gary Gygax is like, "This is really cool. Want to collaborate on the rules?" Arneson says yes. Sends Gary 20 pages of notes. Gary takes it and expands it into the OD&D books, and it gets published. Um, so you can and of course he found TSR to publish the books.
Yeah.
So you can argue all day long about who did what.
Yeah.
Again, I think you have to say Dave Wesley's the father of the tabletop role playing game, and Dave and Gary are the father of Dungeons and Dragons. But it's complicated. You can argue about it all day long. And for those of us in the Midwest who are either from Wisconsin or Minnesota, we get out the long knives on each other because uh, parochialism gets involved, and all this other stuff too.
Yeah, the facts of this, like I know this, and like as you're saying it, I'm just like, oh yeah, I do know all of this, but it immediately falls out of my head because it's just like I don't I'm not in the Midwest. I have no I have no particular parochial stake in it, and I'm a Chaosium guy, so
That's well. The other truth is that everybody was putting some sauce in there,
yeah,
and everybody has things that they can take credit for, um, and everybody is standing on the shoulder of giants. But Dave Wesley does seem to have been there first.
yeah.
Um, so he should probably be the one getting the credit. But here I go saying perhaps controversial things again. Um, I feel like I had one other thing I was going to ask you about with Greg Stafford. Were you into RuneQuest or no?
I so weirdly, RuneQuest was just never on shelves by me. I was able to get Call of Cthulhu books locally in New Jersey, but the RuneQuest for whatever the vagaries of Avalon Hill, I guess at that point, their distro, they were not on shelves, so I didn't get them until much later. Um, they were sort of when I started collecting seriously, it was Chaosium box sets that I had never seen before that really drove me into the pits of eBay. Uh and like I fell in love almost like I've read almost all of the RuneQuest material that is sort of mainline and it's deeply fascinating, but I've not played it and I've only come to know it in the last 15 years.
Yeah, I'm fascinated, but I just don't quite get it. I'm trying to get it because other people I know are really passionate about it, but again, I just don't quite get it. But um, okay, where can people find your book? I mean, it seems like everywhere, but is there anything special that you want to say about where to get it?
I mean, I prefer if you could get it on bookshop.org. I like that better than the other one. Who shall remain nameless. You can also buy it direct from MIT Press. You should be able to get it in Barnes and Noble or your local bookstores. It is distributed by Penguin Random House, so and anywhere they are, which is pretty much everywhere, you should be able to get my book. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I cannot recommend it too highly. It really is fantastic, and it again fills a place that well, like the iPod, it comes along and you're like, how did we get along without this before?
Oh
Like
man.
it's just very engaging and fun and absorbing, and so please go forth and buy it. And Stu, I hope you keep working on this on your Instagram, and I'd love to have you on again sometime.
Yeah, the Instagram is well, the Instagram is actually kind of RIP because Instagram's algorithms became too punishing, but I post basically daily on vintagerpg.com. The same deal, and actually I get to have a little bit of extra space, which is nice. We have the weekly podcast, Vintage RPG Podcast, with my co-host John Hambone McGuire, and Other stuff. My Strange Attractor is putting out a book about dungeons that sort of spins out of the appendix from this book. That should be out this summer or fall. And I'm
Tell
writing a
me about
book
your
about monsters.
podcast really quick.
It's my buddy John was just like, "Hey man, you're doing this Instagram thing. Why don't we fiddle around with podcasts like 8 years ago?" And I was like, "No, I don't want to be on podcasts. That seems like way outside my wheelhouse." But then he was just like, "Ah, come on," and I was like, "Ah, all right, we could try it." And then 8 years went by, and it's basically a weekly podcast. We interview a lot of people, creators, mostly smaller folks trying to get their Kickstarters funded. But and then there's most of the episodes are just me and John sort of riffing on a game, a particular game from the library, where John doesn't have the breadth of experience, so it's sort of like me like being like, John, this is cool, week after week of just John, this is cool. Read this one, you know.
All right. Well, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, again, I'd love to have you on again sometime. Uh, listeners, I will remind you, we have a Patreon. For a mere $3 a month, you get access to our Discord. I post there uh, items from my archive that as I'm slowly digitizing it. You also get extra episodes. I recently posted an hour of discussion between uh, Wizard of the Coast founder and Gen Con owner Peter Adkison and Gen Con historian Matt Shoemaker. It is a delightful and amazing 60 minutes that only Patreon subscribers get to see. So please go forth to our Patreon and support us there. We'd really appreciate it. Stu, again, thank you so much. I really appreciate having you on.
Thank you, man. It's really, I'm blushing over here. I just wrote a book, man. I didn't think it was all that great, but
I didn't even think it was all
I appreciate that y'all like it. I don't know. I'm not good with compliments.
Is there a particular work or maybe a couple works that you put out with TSR that feels the most creatively you? That was
Well, the obvious answer, the one that's most creative with me has to be Planescape.
Woo!
Because it's the one where I got to go off the deep end and they failed to stop me. But they did give me a lot of license to go do something completely different. It was that was a point where White Wolf was like the hot cool game and all this sort of stuff, and TSR was getting that fuddy-duddy kind of feeling, and so Jim Ward was like, we'd like give us something that will kind of like be in that category. And it's about the planes. And if you ever go look at the Book of Planes, the Manual of the Planes that Jeff wrote, or the Manual of the Planes that came previous to that, the planes are weird. They're weird and they make no sense. And in a wonderful way, they make no sense. And so it was like, okay, let's embrace the total surreal weirdness of it, and let's just figure out how we can really, at that point, what can you do? What would be? So you say, this city sits at the top of an infinitely high spire. Well, how's that work? I don't care. Doesn't matter. You just say it does, and it doesn't have any impact on the actual game, but it just adds that air to it, and then you just go from there, and they got to do kind of really strange, stupid things. Some of them which worked, others maybe not so smart.
I have to ask a question on that, on the fact that you're bringing up like the planes and Planescape, because one of the most celebrated, it often comes up as number one on the CRPG list, is Planescape Torment. And I know that obviously you've worked in video games for a long time. What is it like to see somebody take this world that you work at, turn it into a video game, and then that becomes one of the most celebrated CRPGs of all time?
So it's even more interesting than that, because Planescape Torment was done by Interplay.
Yeah.
I was working for Interplay
Huh?
in the same division at that point.
I did not
I
know
was
that.
working on another Planescape title that they were going to do, and while the other team was working on the Torment title based on the Baldur's Gate engine.
Yeah.
And fortunately, I knew the people who were doing it. We didn't spend, it wasn't like they came and consulted with me all the time, but I would go every once in a while and see what they're doing. And I realized, they understood kind of really the basic weirdness of Planescape, right? Colin McComb was one of their
Sure.
designers, and he had kind of taken up the mantle on Planescape after I
Sure.
left.
Yeah.
And so they had good lineage and they had good understanding, and I either by luck or common sense kind of stayed out of their way. I think they did a brilliant job with that. Any game where at that point where you did a computer game where to advance the plot you need to die.
Yeah.
Was like, all right, that's really embracing kind of what this was all about.